Hi, I'm Lee Gelernt at the ACLU. I am the Deputy Director of the ACLU's National Immigrants' Rights Project and Director of the project's Access to the Courts program. I also teach at Columbia Law School, and I have been litigating the issues around the Muslim ban and argued the first case, the first challenge that was brought where we received a nationwide injunction that first weekend. And I am continuing to litigate that case, involved in many other cases around the country on that. I am also monitoring and responding to a lot of the raids we have seen recently. So I was hoping just to let people know where things stand and answer some questions if people have them. Right now, the ACLU is involved in more than 10 challenges to the Muslim ban throughout the country. The first one we brought, as I said, was the case in New York, and that's the Darwish case, and we are filing briefs at midnight tomorrow night, and we will be in court on the 21st next week on Tuesday for a hearing on the merits. The government is trying to throw out our case, saying we have no viable challenge to the executive order. Needless to say, we strongly disagree. We believe the executive order violates equal protection and the religion clauses in the First Amendment because it disfavors Muslims, it favors Christians, and in general is arbitrary distinguishing between majority and minority religions. It also denies due process, it violates people's rights to apply for asylum, and notably, almost every court that has looked at this issue now since our first victory that first weekend has ruled against the government. And so we are seeing courts coming out with a stinging rejection of the executive order. And what we are hearing in response to those court rulings is that the government may not any longer fight to keep the executive order, but may in fact change the executive order. And so we are hearing that potentially as early as tomorrow, maybe even today, we'll see a new executive order. Now, if the executive order only makes minor revisions, minor tweaks, we will obviously continue to fight that because we think the stain of religious discrimination will not disappear simply by a few changes in the order. But if the Trump administration completely abandons their idea of a ban on certain countries and certain religions and just goes back to a regular vetting process like we had under the Obama administration, then we'll take a serious look at that and maybe some of the problems have been solved. But until we see a definitive ruling from the Supreme Court or a complete abandonment by the Trump administration, we will be continuing to challenge these cases in court. On the raids front, we are seeing a lot of activity. As you all have probably seen over the weekend, there were hundreds and hundreds of arrests. And contrary to what the administration is saying, these are not just serious criminals. We are seeing people without even any criminal conviction being arrested in these raids. We are seeing an ICE presence, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement presence in these communities, and it is far more widespread than under the Obama administration. So any attempt to say they're just doing what the Obama administration was doing is wrong. We are seeing ICE people out in the communities, and it's terrorizing communities. It's making kids, older people, everyone scared to be out and about. In fact, in Seattle over the weekend, we had an arrest of someone who had lawful status under DACA, and they were arrested. So I see some questions are coming in. I want to take a question from Peter Hoffman, which says, if a U.S. citizen is stopped at the airport and Customs insists on seeing the contents of their phone, what are their rights? That is an issue that is being addressed by the people in our First Amendment project. In general, people have less rights at the airport. But if that's happening, you ought to contact the ACLU so that we can find out precisely what types of questions are being asked, okay? In terms of the raids, what we're trying to do is get a coalition of people to respond. And let me just step back a second. My feeling is that we are in one of those real classic civil rights moments where it's not just the lawyers going into court, but it's the community groups, people in the community, the leaders all coming together. And I think that's what it's going to take to push back. It can't just be the lawyers. It can't just be the ACLU in court. And so one of the really great things is that when we went to court that first Saturday night in the first challenge to the Muslim ban, When we walked out of court, there were 1,000 people there cheering. And it's going to take that kind of effort. And I think it's going to take that kind of effort with respect to the raids, maybe even more so, that communities come out and protest these raids. And so what we are trying to do is organize a response that includes the lawyers, but it also includes the community groups, and it also includes some of the biggest law firms in the country. The most prestigious private law firms in the country are joining with the ACLU to fight these raids, to send their lawyers out to wherever it happens, big city or rural areas, to gather the facts and find out what's happening. We had a meeting yesterday with 70 law firms, the biggest, most prestigious law firms in the country, and they are ready to join in. And I think what it tells you is that everyone is concerned about what's going on. Let me take another question from Jim Infantino. How can we legally protect children from ICE raids on their parents as they come home from school? As their parents as they come home from school. That's a good question. If the children are lawfully here, then hopefully they're not being harassed. But even if they're not lawfully here, we very much hope the Trump administration is not going after children, trying to separate children, trying to send children back. Remember, when a child comes here, they're coming because their parents have brought them. They cannot control where they're brought. And as the Supreme Court has said over and over, a child should not be punished for whatever their parents do. And that's why there's a constitutional right for children to be allowed to attend public schools regardless of their immigration status. So we hope people will contact the ACLU if they hear about children being harassed or punished on the way back from school. And I think that's a place where the community really needs to gather and make sure that there are no ICE agents outside of schools, and if they hear about that, to call us immediately. There should not be ICE agents outside schools, outside religious institutions, outside hospitals, outside police stations. People in the community need to be able to go out about their business and not worry that they can't get medical care, that they can't get police protection, fire protection, or their children can't go to school. We have another question from Jim Wallace. If someone is registered as a dreamer, do they have more protected status? That's a very good question as well, and I want to talk precisely about that because that's what we saw happen in Seattle on Friday and Saturday, is that someone with DACA status, a dreamer, was picked up. Their status was in place. So this is not someone whose DACA dreamer status had expired, and they still arrested them. And now they're claiming they arrested him because they think there may be some gang affiliation. So, I don't want to give legal advice to anybody on this program because I need to see someone's individual circumstances before I can give legal advice. But what I want to say generally is that you are more protected if you have DACA status, but it doesn't mean that you are completely immune from deportation. And so we need to be clear about that and see how the Trump administration is going to deal with these DACA dreamers who are in status. But certainly, if someone who has DACA or dreamer status commits a crime, they are subject to deportation. And so you cannot assume that just because you're a DACA or dreamer, or even if you're a lawful permanent resident, you can do whatever you want and not be deported. But if there are no allegations about you of criminal activity and you're being harassed and you're in DACA dreamer status, we absolutely want to know about it. So the short answer is you're more protected but not completely immune from deportation. And so I think that we're in the early stages of the Trump administration. We're seeing these raids go on, but we need to gather information. We need to hear from you about exactly what's going on. I don't, unfortunately, think anything's going to be off the table with this administration. So I don't want to give you any definitive answers that this category or that category are safe. And if you're stopped by an ICE agent, remember you have rights. If you're in your home, you ask for a warrant. It has to be from a judge. You do not have to talk. In some states, you may have to give your name. If you're here lawfully, then you can give your ID and show you're here lawfully. But under no circumstances should anybody be giving fake ID. So Shelley, Renee, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly. are you saying protest matters? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we saw it in the Muslim ban challenges. You know, it's not just what the courts are doing, I think, and not just what the lawyers are doing in court. I think judges take into account about how much harm is occurring, and they only know about that harm. They know about it through the lawyers, but they also see it for themselves, the chaos that this executive order caused, children being arrested, people who helped. And one of our clients in the New York case was someone who worked for years helping the U.S. military in Iraq. He's a U.S. interpreter, yet he gets here and this administration says, no, we don't want you. Well, why would anybody continue to help our U.S. military if it's going to put their life at stake and they're not going to be allowed to come here? Getting those stories out is critical, and protesting is critical, pushing back against the administration, but also trying to influence your congressperson to say, hey, we don't like this, we want changes. It's critical. And I think people ask me, is there going to be protest fatigue? I don't see it yet, and I don't think there is. No one can be out there every day. That's unrealistic. Pick your spots, but do not think just because we've gotten a few good court cases that the challenges are over. You need to be out there constantly because there's much more to come, unfortunately. Blair, Staten, or Staten, I apologize for not knowing how to pronounce. When you say, quote unquote, ICE cannot be outside a school, is that a regulation? What would one do? Call who? Take a photo? That's a good idea. Definitely take a photo. Send it to the ACLU. We'll try and get to the media. There's no law right now that I know of that would absolutely prohibit the administration from changing the practice of not being outside schools. And so we may have to challenge that in court, but we can also push back. Hopefully that's something that the American people will push back on. If you get a picture of an ICE agent standing outside a school waiting to harass young children, let's get it out there. Let's get it to the media. Hopefully fair-minded, people of good faith, regardless of which side of the aisle they're on, will push back on that kind of thing. If you see people being harassed outside of a hospital, deterring them from getting health care, let's push back on it. Your idea of getting a photo, excellent. Absolutely excellent idea. Fadi 2 asks, is the naturalization process for green card holders affected by what's happening? That's another good question. We have a case ongoing about precisely that, about people trying to naturalize. And this is a case out in Seattle about people trying to naturalize or adjust their status to lawful permanent resident. And what we are finding is that if you are Muslim, you are getting extra scrutiny to the point where it's delayed for years and years, and only with court action are people getting naturalized. So if you have a case like that where you believe that you've met all the requirements under the statute for naturalization, but you're still not being naturalized or still not being given a green card, let us know immediately, because we can add you to that case or hopefully get you relief from this case. But we are very concerned that there's a policy of not naturalizing people or not giving people their green cards if they're Muslim based on just association, no evidence about the person being a danger, but just saying, well, they're in this community or they go to this mosque or something along those lines. And so we absolutely want to know about that. We filed that case a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to be proceeding with it. Kim Erickson Yaman, again, I apologize for, I'm sure I am bungling people's names. What can sanctuary cities do in the face of these raids? Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. The cities are pushing back, or at least some of them, which is great. And so we need the cities to push back. They will have big-time lawyers, and they need to push back. The ACLU is considering how to get involved in some of these lawsuits. We would not be the direct party, potentially, because it's a fight between the federal government and the cities, but we may very well intervene in these lawsuits to protect the individuals who are being affected. And so cities can absolutely push back, and I think that they need to stand up to these threats against the federal government. And then what they need to say is, look, this isn't about protecting criminals, it's about protecting people in our community. And what they as cities have found is, if they go after and help the federal government go after people in the immigrant community, their cities suffer. people in the immigrant communities are woven into the fabric of these communities. They are contributing economically, they're contributing in every other way. And just on a very practical standpoint, police chiefs are pushing back against what the Trump administration is doing because it hurts their ability to make the community safe. If an immigrant sees a crime, we want that immigrant to report that crime. But if they're scared that if they come to the New York police station or the LA police station or wherever and report that crime, what they're going to get are questions about their immigration status, they're not going to report that crime. And so in all those ways, we need people in these immigrant communities to work with our police to solve real crimes, and they are not going to do that if they think every time I have an encounter with a local police officer, he's going to turn me over to the federal government. So just from a pure safety standpoint, the cities are pushing back, and rightly so. And it's the police chiefs, I think, the ones who have educated themselves about these issues that are pushing back the hardest. And so you need to, if you live in a community where there's some question about how the city's going to handle this, you need to be out there trying to educate your leaders about how this could make us less safe, not more safe. Rafa Mohammed, he asks, as a Pakistani citizen, as an H-1B, how am I at risk of traveling internationally? What can I do apart from DHS trip redress program? Yeah, I mean, we have, as you may know, lawsuits challenging the no-fly list and keeping people from traveling or coming back in. You know, if you're on a no-fly list, then I think you need to contact us because we have a lawsuit ongoing on the West Coast about what kind of redress people have if they believe they're on the no-fly list wrongly. You need to contact us. I would need to know more about your particular situation to give you specific advice, and I can't give you legal advice now during this program, but you should contact us if you have any belief that you're on a no-fly list. Jill Mahe, are veterans protected? I've been hearing they are deporting those who fought for our country. Veterans do not have any special protection against deportation. They can be deported, and we know veterans who are deported. If you hear about that, contact us. I would also suggest you call the Yale Veterans Rights Clinic that deals specifically with deportation of veterans. I think they are a very good resource. But do not assume that simply because you're a veteran and serve this country that this administration won't go after you. Zeni Zarzuela, can people be stopped while jogging or doing anything normal and ask for ID just because they look Latino, even when they are U.S. citizens? The answer is no, but it happens, and it happens way too frequently. And that's another thing we want to know about. We have a lawsuit going on in Virginia we just filed, in Maryland that we just filed, where a Latino driver was stopped, and we believe she was stopped because of her Latino appearance. We have been hearing about that a lot throughout the country. If you believe that's the reason you were stopped, then we want to know about it. Under no circumstances can police racially target you. If they're stopping you because you're African American, because you're Latino, any of those reasons, that is prohibited, and that shouldn't be happening, and we want to hear about it. And if you're a U.S. citizen, it's happened, you want to ask the police officer why. You obviously don't want to get belligerent, but you want to ask why, and you want to contact us, because the only way we can stop something along these lines is if we know about it. And we need to know it's a pattern so that we can go out and try and stop it. We've had lawsuits about sort of stop and frisk where the police are stopping people and we think there's a racial disparity in who they're talking about. We will be filing new lawsuits in the future around the country about this. We need to hear from you. Lorena Patty, as naturalized citizens, do you recommend we carry a copy of our naturalization certificate or a copy of our passport? I am not sure whether you need to do that. Having a U.S. passport with you, I think would probably, stop any harassment. but I don't know that you have to go that far, but certainly you should have ID with you, and you should be able to produce it if you don't have it with you. I don't want to give you a definitive answer to that. I don't know what groups around the country are recommending in particular areas, and it might depend a little on where you are living, so you might want to talk to community groups in your area or reach out to us after this program. Yesenia Gonzalez, are undocumented immigrants entitled to a lawyer? That's a good question and doesn't have one clear answer. Here's the basic situation. If you are charged with a crime, then you are entitled to a lawyer. Absolutely, no questions about it. And if you can't afford a lawyer, you are entitled to a public defender and that public defender will be appointed to you. So if you're charged with a crime and you're in criminal court, you will get a lawyer, and make sure you get a lawyer. The situation's very different if you're charged with an immigration violation and brought to immigration court. You are then entitled to have a lawyer with you in court, but, and this is critical, the government will not pay for the lawyer. So you will have to call organizations that provide legal service free of charge if you can't afford one to get a lawyer. But the case can go forward without you having a lawyer. You're supposed to be given time to get a lawyer, and if you believe you need a lawyer, ask for time to get a lawyer, but it will not come free of charge from the government as it would if you're charged with a criminal offense. Shannon Stearns, what direct action can we take as concerned citizens allies? Is calling ICE an effective form of resistance? That's an interesting question. I don't know about calling ICE directly. I have not heard about people doing that. It probably couldn't hurt, but whether they're going to be responsive, I think, is a whole nother question. I would recommend calling community groups to volunteer your services, calling the ACLU, but also joining protests, and also, I think, very importantly, calling your congressperson and making it clear that you live in the district. Because one thing that will happen is a congressperson who just sees a general tweet or general Facebook post and doesn't know whether you live in the district may not be as inclined to take it seriously. But if you say to your congressperson, me and I've now organized 500 other people, and we live in your district, and we feel strongly that there should not be ICE agents in front of the schools, or that there shouldn't be this Muslim ban, or that communities shouldn't be terrorized by these raids, or whatever it is that you feel strongly about, go to your congressperson and make it clear that you live in the district and you are going to organize people in the district and keep the pressure up on your congressperson. I think that's probably more effective than going to ICE directly, although it's an interesting idea about going to ICE directly. I just wouldn't make that your sole focus. One thing I would urge people to do is go to ACLU.org and the Know Your Rights materials on the ACLU website, because we have good materials there and they're in multiple languages, and they will tell you your basic rights. You want to follow up with community groups, a lawyer if you have one, about more specifics, but that will give you the basics about what are your rights when stopped by an ICE officer. They're in lots of different languages. If they're not in a language that you speak, you should try and contact us or contact a community group that might be able to translate. We will try and continue to put it in more and more languages, but it is in many languages, and I think it's a good resource. There are other resources out there, but I urge you to go to ACLU.org and look at the Know Your Rights materials. Thank you so much for joining me today.